Welcome. My name is Thomas Allen Munn, and I'm the author of Payback: Why the Top 1% Must Invest in the Rest and How It Can Renew America. I wrote Payback to deal explicitly with an ongoing trend that politicians of all stripes have refused to admit exists. Over the last 40 years, the gap between what it costs to live the American dream and the market income of ordinary workers has widened from a gully to a canyon. This canyon now threatens the future of the middle class, and if nothing's done, Americans with ordinary skills will fall out of the middle class. Payback proposes a tax policy that will enable capitalism not only to save the middle class, but to grow and make it more prosperous. Since Payback digs deeply into the weeds, I've recorded this Q&A to give readers a quick take on it. To make the Q&A easier for readers to digest, I've divided it into 15 sections. Payback is free to read on a website that I've created for the convenience of readers. It's my hope that Payback will contribute to a national dialogue on tax policy that I believe will take place sometime in the next decade. Now let's get started with the Q&A. Part 12. With the next calamity, the seemingly impossible will become possible. Question. Now that you've explained how you think the AmeriShare tax will strengthen America, it's time for you to prove that it can be enacted. All right, I'm more than willing, but I'll warn you that the answer lies deep, deep in the weeds. Under current circumstances, it's folly to believe that the AmeriShare tax could be enacted. History teaches, however, that current circumstances change, often for the worse and sometimes much worse. I readily admit that for the AmeriShare tax to be enacted, there must be a change so earth-shaking that it shocks a large majority of voters into believing that they can't keep a semblance of their standard of living unless there's a huge increase in taxes. Once a large majority of voters come to believe that, the politicians will soon follow. What kind of change are you talking about? A cataclysmic change, one that cracks the foundation of the economy and forces ordinary Americans to worry about how they are going to put food on their table. As destructive as the current pandemic has been, many people are still hanging in there, unaware of how much it has weakened us. It's the next calamity that concerns me. I believe that sometime in the next several years, it's almost certain that America will be confronted with one or more calamities which will force it to incur massive amounts of new debt. In just the last 12 years, two calamities have struck America: the Great Recession of 2008 and 9 and the pandemic of 2020. Each of these calamities severely damaged the economy and added trillions to an already bulging national debt. Having been racked by two calamities in the last 12 years, I believe that America is now only a calamity away from being forced by market forces to put its financial house in order. Give some examples of what kind of calamities you're talking about. Well, I'll suggest just a few that readily come to mind. Another pandemic for which there's no ready vaccine and which carries a high mortality rate. Natural disasters such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, or global warming which results in sharp temperature changes, an increase in sea levels, more frequent and destructive hurricanes, massive flooding in some areas, and droughts in other areas, leading to a disruption of global markets, mass migration, and regional shooting wars. An international debt crisis ignited by one or more debtor countries defaulting on their debt and spooking creditors. A major shooting war resulting from a geopolitical miscalculation, like China's adventurism in the South China Sea and America's reneging on the Iran deal. A cyber attack which devastates America's economy by disrupting major industries, capital markets, and the banking system. And a biological attack which kills millions of Americans and inundates the healthcare delivery system and wrecks the economy. Do you think that America is especially vulnerable to these types of calamities? Yes, we live in a time of excessive carbon emissions which are endangering the climate, the fracturing of an international order that has kept the peace and created prosperity for most of the last 70 years, sluggish economic growth that's led to increasing social and political unrest in many of the world's leading nations, and the inability of many governments to solve relatively simple problems. Avoiding or mitigating calamities requires swift and smart governmental action, not only by one nation, but by the international community. Given the ineptitude of many of today's governments and their inability to work together in international organizations, it's doubtful that they'd be willing or able to work together to avoid an oncoming calamity, much less recover from one. What would be the economic effects of a calamity? A calamity on the scale I'm talking about would destroy trillions of dollars of public and private infrastructure, put many businesses out of business, some permanently, throw millions out of work, and inflict grievous harm on millions more. The tens of millions of Americans thrown out of work would suddenly become dependent on government assistance to put food on the table. I believe that it would take many trillions to recover from such a calamity, and the only source of funds for the recovery would be for America to incur trillions of new debt. To cope with such a calamity, America would have no choice but to incur whatever debt was necessary on whatever terms were available. This concludes Part 12.